Welcome to this episode of the Astrology of Family Karma and Relationships podcast. I'm your host, Alexander Mallon, along with our wonderful co-host,
Sheila G, your guide on the side.
Today's episode is about Sun Father and Moon Mother. Part 2, your birth chart is a map of your family consciousness.
And Alexander, we would like to invite our listeners and our viewers to follow our podcast on Apple and Spotify and subscribe to our YouTube channel, because that'll help us grow and be more accessible on the search engines. We would also like to offer our listeners and viewers a 10% discount to the first 5 listeners every month. So use the code podcast5 when you book your session online at astrologyspirit.com to have a consultation with Alexander.
So today, Sheila, our discussion is about the sun-moon phase relationship in a person's birth chart. We did cover sort of part 1 in a previous episode, but here we're going to flesh it out a little bit more, some of the other finer points to look for, and also we'll be discussing the birth charts of presidential candidates, Joe Biden and Donald Trump. So in a birth chart, this father-mother relationship at our birth is reflected, mirrored in a birth chart by the sun placement and the moon placement. They are really a direct reflective mirror together of the consciousness of the family that we're born into.
For sure.
So it's important to know for our viewers and listeners, Sheila, that our birth chart is about our being born into a season of nature. Winter, spring, summer, fall. That's what astrology is. It's about cycles and cycles of nature. And of course, this is as old as fire and stars. Astrology goes back. Some people say, well, how old is astrology? In modern Western recorded history, about 5,500 years old, although now with the discovery of really early sites like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, we say our man sort of social created astrology humanity goes back to 12,000, 13,000 years ago. But the important thing to understand, and this graphic shows those people who are watching on YouTube, early man did look at lunar cycles, especially. They could trace the motion of the moon in the evening sky. And here, this bone fragment that has a lunar calendar in it from Paleolithic man tells us astrology is as old as fire and stars. That's really what it's about. So it's about these cycles, Sheila, of the sun and moon and earth, where the sun is in the sky and where the moon is going around the earth every month. But that talks about that nighttime illumination of that moon in the nighttime sky. Of course, we're so familiar with sunrise and noon hour and sunset and seeing that journey of the day from getting up and going to work, coming home. But we forget that what this solar motion is, it describes your sun sign. Sheila, the backdrop of stars, if you could block out that blinding sun, the backdrop of stars behind that sun is that sun sign of the month. So I'd like to remind my students and my clients, whenever I work with every client, I try to remind them that their personal birth sign, Sheila, is really their season sign of birth. So we look at a birth chart, folks, especially in terms of sun sign and moon sign relationship. We look at your season sign, your sun sign, what season you're born into, and your moon
Certainly.
sign, what phase of emotional relationship that moon sun relationship is having.
Yeah, I mean, most people are very much familiar with their sun sign, but your moon sign is another aspect of your birth chart you would want to be familiar with.
Yeah, it's sort of like saying your ego sign, your light of consciousness, that consciousness of the society, social, family dynamic around you, what was happening is your sun sign. I call it your ego sign. And the moon sign is the reflection of the sunlight. It is that emotional, personal, internal, they call it the plexal mind, the gut mind of what was happening when we are entering our family dynamic. So it's a really good way to think about this, Sheila, to believe and rather to observe, I meant to say, that an astrological birth chart describes our early life experiences and our beliefs about our family. That when a child is born, that newborn is entering into an ongoing family storyline. And some marriage years can be happy. Some marriage years can be times of stress. It depends, of course, even if you're born into a marital dynamic, a marital situation or not. Some children are not born with both parents. So not only does the chart of the birth chart of the baby describe that moment that a child was born, the birth chart also describes what was happening for mom and dad when this child enters that family situation, when this child enters that experience that mom and dad are having, whether it's an upbeat, happy experience or a challenging experience, a time when perhaps one or both parents are really achieving in the world financially, or maybe conversely, when they're having a rough time.
Yep, certainly. And the more you know, the better you can flow with life as you come to understand yourself and your relationship with your mother, father, and your siblings.
Yeah, really, we could sort of say that the heart of astrological work is to be able to be objective about that family experience, to understand what our experience was. But I think kind of a key thing, Sheila, when we're growing and maturing and kind of coming to wisdom, we think of it in our middle and older years coming to wisdom, but the earlier, the sooner the better, coming to wisdom that we are children born into a dynamic. We're part of a family social flow. And it's really one of those things astrologers, Sheila, I think don't typically look at. But the birth chart not only describes the nature of that soul coming into a family scene, that quality of that person that kind of matches or fits a marital family dynamic, but we have to remember for mom and dad, well, mom especially, right? Mom's having a human come out of her body. It's a significant moment in her life journey. And for mom and dad both, that baby's entering that family dynamic. So as a mom yourself, you can tell our listeners and viewers that this is certainly a powerful theme, isn't it?
Almost certainly, because I only had one child, but I do know people who've had more than one, and they can tell the difference between the two children. One may have been quiet and easy and felt really good, and the next child comes along, they're very active, kicking, and they're thinking, boy, I must have a athlete, or I'm going to have a football star or something in there, because this child is really on the go. So yes, it's each person's experience is uniquely their own.
I mean, there's so many factors that are happening, certainly internally, hormonally, environmentally, socially. We're filming and recording this in summertime of 2024, this time where there's so much social challenge and change happening politically in America with the upcoming presidential election of Biden and Trump, who we'll discuss today. But of course, there is this sort of social fabric. So we could sort of say for this imagining experience, this imagining concept of astrology, any baby born now, certainly in the U.S., maybe worldwide, because the U.S. is a major player in the world. Any baby born now is going to have that emotional, psychological, social coloring for mom and dad. That baby will experience mom and dad's journey through 2024. Not only mom carrying a baby, but this circumstance, this social, political circumstance the baby is being born into. That birth chart will describe that circumstance. Just like for you and I, Sheila, those children who were born as 60s kids, we can sort of say, early Vietnam War or pre-Vietnam War, Vietnam War kids, that dynamic was shown in their charts, mirrored in their charts. And similarly with previous generations, again, Biden and Trump are good examples of those individuals that were part of that World War II experience. So as you said, Sheila, what's really key is not only to look at our birth charts in terms of our sun sign, the conscious light of day, the conscious light of ego is what a birth chart sun sign describes. Your sun sign describes that season, like being born in the middle of summertime, being born during a proverbial, maybe literal blizzard in wintertime. That environment molds the social dynamic, molds the social calendar, and we're all connected to that. So your sun sign describes that social environmental calendar that's imprinting mom and dad and the baby. But here, this slide that we have right now, for those who are viewing, describes that lunar phase. And so we mentioned in our last production that a lunar phase that is waxing, going from the new moon into the building light, the light of the moon being ever greater every night, that moon moving around the Earth orbitally, right? So that that moon face begins to show brighter and brighter. That where you're born in this lunar phase, the waxing phase, building light, describes emotionally the moon, reflected sun energy. You know, there's literally the light of the sun reflected, but it's our emotional, personal experience of mommy, where she was at that year of our birth, that day of that month when we came from her body. That moon phase describes that emotional tenor of that day and that sort of psychic emotional relationship that mom has to birthing this particular child. That moon describes that energetic system during that year and that part of the year when we're born. So if you're born during a waxing moon phase, between new moon to full, that waxing building light, it says there is this energetic, this incentive to grow, to act, to achieve, to make something happen, to bring things to light. And when you're born, conversely, at the full moon and just after, that energy has built to a phase of full completion. And now waning, we're reflecting, we're reviewing what has come to completion. We're reviewing and thinking back upon what has been done. So waxing moon children are directive, assertive, energetic, outgoing. And waning moon children are reflective in reviewing, contemplating, and thinking about what has transpired. We'll look at this in the chart of Joe Biden, Donald Trump, and also the chart of the United States.
Sure.
So here's the U.S. chart. July 4th, 1776. I use what's called the Sibley chart. In other words, there is a question mark for us as astrologers, exactly what time the U.S. was born on July 4th, 1776. Do we sign the documents in the first part of the day, early morning, the middle of the night? Do we sign those documents here at 5:10 p.m. in the evening? So this chart shows the sun was not overhead at noon hour. The sun was not rising. The sun had culminated at noon, and the sun's heading towards sunset in the evening, 5:10 p.m. There's the sun, symbolized in a birth chart. It describes like a sundial, what portion of the day a person's born in, daytime hours or nighttime hours. We could say our U.S. was an late afternoon baby, if you will. The U.S. chart's a late afternoon baby, Sheila. That we're born in the Cancer time. We're born in the 13th degree of the sign of Cancer. That is the 13th day of the sign of Cancer on July 4th every year. It's the 13th degree, 13th day of the sign of Cancer. And that season sign is about birthing. The animal totem that the ancients gave to this time of year, those three stars that make up the sign of Cancer, it's an animal totem that describes fecundity and birthing, like a crab gives birth to 500,000 young at one time. That's why they chose the crab for Cancer season. The next sign over at just a half a month, the U.S. will be entering into is the sign of Leo the lion. So we have the Cancer, the crab of birthing and family, and Leo the lion of the tribe, the lion and the lioness who govern their pups.
But we're also, I mean, with us, so we were birthed as we're finishing our day, coming inward from our day.
So you could say that's true, that we're born in the afternoon. Any child who's born in the middle to late afternoon comes in normally when mom and dad are gathering the fruits of their labor of the day, like around 4 p.m. Roughly standard time, which is another issue. So standard time, so 4 to 5 p.m. we are finishing the workday, where we've risen in the morning and we've done the achieving during the day, and we're gathering what we've earned collectively. Who gets what? Who gets paid, how much you get paid. Really, every day at 5 p.m., we're kind of figuring out what's the result of that day. The implication for the U.S. is that our nation has two basic conscious light of sun principles. This idea of what have we achieved and where are we together collectively in an objective way. Who gets what? How much do we get paid as individuals? Who is behind the earning and the taking and the doing? Who's the boss? Who's the chief and who are the Indians, etc. That's one theme. We're a Cancer nation, midsummer, so it's about birthing, fecundity, and June, July, family. In modern culture, children are off from school and come home. So a birth that happens during Cancer Leo time means any children who are already born get to see mom's belly be really huge and a baby come out, a baby into the family. It's that season of family unity, family connection is Cancer Leo. So our whole nation's fundamental underbelly is family gathering, family unity.
Yes, where the U.S. soul is a family-oriented soul.
Yeah, although, some astrologers, Sheila, say that the sun is the soul of the birth chart. And technically in Astrology 101, the symbol or glyph for the moon, the half circle in Judeo-Christian mysticism, the half circle symbolizes the nature of the soul, where the full circle, like the whole circle of the seasons, symbolizes spirit, like life force, birthing spirit. So the spirit of the United States is Cancerian and Leonian in how we come together as a nation in a personal, human, emotional, birthing kind of way, family-oriented way. You'll see in this chart, Sheila, that we have the sun on one side of the sky, July 4th, 1776, and the moon on the opposite side of the sky. So it says that our nation is born during that sort of post-full moon time period. That the full moon has happened, and now the waning gibbous, the fat moon that follows that full moon. Full moon is awareness, like a harvest moon. The sun sets, the harvest moon rises. You have illumination from the harvest moon. It's objective awareness, emotional moon, objective awareness. And the U.S. chart has emotional objective awareness. Like we could say, women obtaining the right to vote. Women obtaining the right to govern their bodies, a big theme for 2024.
Well, I was going to say, so at the birth of our country, if the sun represents father, what were our forefathers, what was their collective thinking about our country with that placement of the
Well,
sun?
here's what's really cool about astrology charts, that these charts are an astronomical map of the sky. So number one, I'll always refer to astrology from an astronomical standpoint, since people know I'm an avid amateur astronomer. This birth chart, every birth chart, is an actual map of the sky. And this map of the sky in July 4th of 1776 shows a big bundle or stellium grouping, Mercury, Sun, Jupiter, Venus, Mars, Uranus, all bundled together in this chart, opposite two planets. Opposite Pluto of plutocracy or monarchy, like the U.S. is born opposite the monarchy, escaping the monarchy. Opposite plutocracy, opposite corporatocracy that governs and that manages everything. The monarch rules. Opposite that is our nation. We don't want that individual singular monarch governing our lives. We want to have a family connectedness where we're all interwoven like in a family. There's a democratic sort of way of seeing things. Opposite to that family unity is the higher element of what's governing, overseeing. And Pluto symbolizes plutocracy or monarchy. Our moon is very much next sign over from Pluto. As a backyard astronomer, I look at that birth chart observationally. As an astronomer, we'll look at the sky. I'd say, oh, gee, that moon and Pluto are kind of close together in the sky. Of a whole 360-degree wheel, a whole big sky to look at day and night. They're right side by side. There's a junction of the emotional feeling state with this monarchy and what comes before. So it says what comes before our birth is significantly powerful to us. That monarchy, that British mindset, that European mindset is deeply, deeply emotionally ingrained in us, and in some ways oppositional to our nature, our spirit.
Well, so what? So if the moon represents mother, what was the feminine energy in our country like at the time of this birth?
This says the feminine energy was suppressed. The feminine energy was overshadowed. The feminine energy was not so strongly there. The feminine energy, the moon, had just been full, so there's an awareness of duality. But the moon is on the wane. not on the rise, not waxing, but waning. So it suggests an internal quality, a quality of reflection. So first of all, it's an opposition, like a seesaw. And I always say when you have oppositions in a birth chart, including if you're born during a full moon, as the U.S. was born during just after a full moon, as Joe Biden is born just before a full moon, as Donald Trump is born exactly at full moon during a lunar eclipse, that state of those three charts all have the sun on one side of the sky and the moon opposite by happenstance. So to have it's sort of polarity. It's like I always say when you have an opposition, Sheila, it's like having a seesaw ride. You can have a good seesaw ride if you have a good partner, or a bad seesaw ride. Depends on the partner you've got and what's happening. And a birth chart describes. So on the seesaw ride of the U.S. chart, with the sun on one side at sunset and the moon on the other in the early morning part of the birth chart of the U.S., opposite that sun, it says there is an oppositional force. There's a full moon force or a seesaw ride, but with Pluto, plutocracy on one hand, and Jupiter Sun conjunction for the U.S. chart on the other, there's sort of freedom of expression on the one hand, and there is constraint or containment on the other. That's a big theme, by the way, because the U.S. chart has a very significant cycle in the years of 2020 through 24, and that is the planet Pluto. Pluto in the sky is back exactly where it was when the U.S. was born. Pluto's orbit around the sun is 248 years. Our nation is about 250 years old, a little bit less. And here we are in our first Pluto return. Whenever a nation has Pluto conjunct its sun or opposite its sun, as we have now, it is a theme of Pluto, life, death, rebirth, restructuring. So we are in a powerful first theme of life, death, rebirth, restructuring. And when you go back to other nations, let's say like the chart of Great Britain, and you look at Pluto cycles every 250 years, 248 years, whenever Pluto does its orbit, you'll see a similar theme with Great Britain and its revolutions and turbulences. But here we are at a major phase of revolution. It's also Pluto approaching the U.S. moon. Pluto's now in the sign of Aquarius, the same sign that the moon occupied when we were born. We are going through a life, death, rebirth revolution regarding women. Do you know, sidebar here, folks, in a chart of a country, the sun symbolizes the spirit force, the essence of that country. The moon symbolizes the women, the feminine, the feeling, the reflection of the essence, the full moon, the reflection of the essence of that country. So we're not only reviewing our essence as a nation, which is all about Cancer, sun sign, July 4th, family. What does it mean to be a member of the family of the United States? That's a question mark. What does it mean to be one of many people from many different family backgrounds? That's the melting pot of the United States. And that Pluto cycle we're having both in our birth chart, and now it's for our first Pluto return to where Pluto was when we were born. Opposite, it's another life, death, Plutonian plutocrats. Pluto is plutocrats, a plutocratic review of the balance of this nation. And boy, we are having a balance issue with men versus women, the sun opposite the moon right now.
Certainly, and also a power issue with who's running, with the person running the country.
Indeed, it brings up power themes. So one idea I had was to take this birth chart, typical when we look at relationship charts, Sheila, we might take, many times I'll have a client call me and say, I've got a new gentleman in my life, Alexander. Can you take his birth chart and compare it to mine to see, we call it in astrology, synastry, to see how we align, what aligns and connects. Is it, good connections, challenging connections? How can we grow together positively? And how can we avoid sort of imploding or overly challenging, aggressing, what have you, with each other? So part of our effort today is to look at the birth chart of the United States and to look at the chart of Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Joe Biden in his birth chart, again, is a full moon baby. So just born before the full moon, the waxing moon. It says that there's an energetic waxing energy for Joe to emotionally review his family and to emotionally have objectivity. Joe Biden is a sunrise baby. We see that sun rising in his chart. the data for Joe Biden, November 30th, 1942, 8:30 in the morning in Scranton, Pennsylvania. And at 8:30 in the morning in November, kind of a winter month, the sun is just rising, not earlier, above that horizon line in the east for Joe. We see also that we have Mercury on one side and Venus on the other.
We have
Venus
Venus
is
there.
very close. Yeah,
Mhm.
beautiful conjunction to the sun, right, Sheila?
Yes.
So if you have that in a person's birth chart, what does it mean to have the essence, the spirit force, the ego of the person conjoined to Venus?
Venus is the love goddess.
Right. So Venus
Mhm.
cycles roughly a year and 3/4 around the sun. They coincide with human experience of a relationship,
Mhm.
family, love. Okay, so it says when you have a Venus conjunct sun in a birth chart, it says typically that when we're born, when Joe was born, he was greatly loved. He was really wanted. He was greatly loved. That sun was rising, new dawn, new day, new baby. And Joe was beloved. Sun symbolizes father, moon symbolizes mommy. Joe was beloved by his father. Joe would have had a sense of being loved by his father, so much so that Joe's name was taken from his father, right?
Yes. Yes. It's Joe Jr.
Joe Jr. And Joe was the firstborn child of this family. So
Yes.
new baby, new dawn, new day, new baby, sunrise chart, and a whole new generation of Bidens for Joe Sr. And so Joe Sr. really saw himself when he looked down on that crib sunrise chart with Venus rising. Dad looks down and says, my boy, my baby, he's me, he's an extension of me. And this says, too, astrologically, that Joe is actually genetically his father's son, more than mom. Joe is much more his father's son, more than mom, and that Joe's dad is in love with his son. The
What
sun-moon
about
relationship is that a positive aspect. It's called a trine. That sun is almost early Sag fire sign. That moon is just coming out of fire sign Aries. It's a 0 Taurus moon. And so there's a good relationship of sun to moon here, basically a good relationship. It says mom and dad are basically in a good space. Dad is rising to meet the challenges of the outer world, career success. And when Joe was born, his father was really kicking butt financially. They were doing extremely well financially, is the fact of the matter, as this Venus money with
money?
son, daddy
Mhm.
suggests. And mom is down here in the bottom of the chart in the area of children in her home. She wants babies. She wants family. Maybe they probably just bought a house. I'm going to say if any historians out there want to look up what happened for the Bidens when Joe Biden was born in 42, mom and dad probably just bought a house. And so there's this whole like picket fence and 2.5 dogs and having a bunch of kids. This is the American ideal, July 4th, Cancer Nation, the American ideal of family. So Joe is a product of a happy family. Mom is focused on her duty as a mother and to give birth. Dad is focused on his outer world ability to achieve career-wise. Joe's relationship therefore is very sort of family-centric, traditional family-centric. Biden's chart is interesting because we have the moon exactly
Oh, wait a minute. This is
opposite the sun.
Donald.
Pardon me. Trump's chart, June 14th of 1946, 10:54 in the morning. That's the time most people use for Trump that I use as well. June 14th, 46, 10:54 in the morning, Queens, New York, with the last degree of Leo rising, 29 degrees Leo, which in ancient astrological history is the fixed star Regulus. It's this bright white giant star in the heart of the lion. It is the royal stars of the 4 royal stars of Egypt. It is the royal star, the star of the king. And that's the star that Donald Trump has rising in his chart. And the planet that conjoins it, the planet that was rising literally, in this case, 3 degrees, we're talking 9 minutes, 12 minutes rather, before Donald's birth, that planet Mars was just rising in the eastern horizon. It says rising, the rising energy of this birth is martial and
God of
monarchy.
war. Mars is the god of war.
Mars is the god of war. That's correct. So the god of war rising, the fixed star Regulus, the monarch rising with Mars, the sword in his hand. Mars is orange, by the way. This part of the chart describes one's body, one's look, and it says, orange, or maybe a person's face gets flushed when they get angry, or a person who gets embarrassed will get turned orangey red. This is Mars rising. It's an orangey red kind of personality, red personality. In contrast to Joe Biden, who's got Venus, the goddess of love, rising, Donald Trump has Mars, the god of war, rising. Rising is how we rise to meet the outer world. It's our sort of our social family imprint. It's really the synaptic imprint when you're born. That rising sign and rising planets, if you have them, describe how you rise to meet the world. Biden, Sun Venus conjunction, personally egoically loving. Trump, Pluto, plutocrats, Mars, a Mars Pluto conjunction. Plutocrats and Mars warlike plutocrats is how Donald Trump's chart shows he rises. I think that charts do describe us physically. They do describe how we engage. Biden engages Venusianly, trying to bring an olive branch. Trump engages Pluto Mars, explosive plutonium. That's plutonium. For a president to be identified with plutonium, think of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That's a kind of concern in general. And I was concerned first, chapter 1, Donald Trump. I will be concerned chapter 2. Lastly, Sheila, Donald Trump is a Gemini with Uranus, the planet of revolution. Uranus discovered, folks, during the French and American revolutions in the 1700s. That's when Uranus was discovered astronomically. So Uranus for mankind symbolizes revolution. At the top of his chart, career revolutionary.
So
solar, Sun, Uranus, a person of revolution.
Well, Sun is daddy. So how was Donald's relationship with his dad if you were to describe it from this chart?
It says that Donald's father identifies his son as an aspect of himself, that Donald's father was focusing on outer world career achievements when this baby was born, that Donald's mother was like Biden. Donald's mother was in the bottom part of the chart, the area of family and children. So they're similar in that way. But here, the moon is exactly opposite full moon to the sun with Donald's chart. So the question is, was Donald's daddy the sun and mommy the moon, were they having a good seesaw ride or a challenging seesaw ride? They're dead opposite to each other. It's a full moon. Donald Trump was born during a full moon cycle, and he was born during a lunar eclipse where the earth, the ego, material reality, material physical, the material plane of goods and services and earnings and monetary achievement is opposite the moon. The earth and all of its material focus blocks the light of the sun from the moon. So the lunar eclipse has the earth blocking out, if you will, the light of the moon. There's no awareness. There is a lack of awareness. There is a blocking out of the feminine principle.
And mom is there in the 4th house of home. So
it says mom's identity was about giving birth and having children and taking care of the family. Dad's identity was the outer world and career, and those two were not in concert, but they were in opposition full moon, but having a bad seesaw ride. And furthermore, as an astronomer, backyard astronomer, I see that Neptune as being sort of in this chart almost at the midpoint, almost at the midpoint. The moon on one side, the sun on the other, and the Neptune right in between. And what is Neptune in astrology? Do you know, Sheila?
Well, definitely has to do with water, but also disillusioned or not seen.
Yeah, Neptune was discovered in the mid 1800s when we discovered gaseous states of chemicals, like we're breathing oxygen, nitrogen, but we can't hold it and show the audience oxygen, nitrogen, but we know it's there. So the periodic table was expanded when Neptune was discovered. It's all about what you cannot see. Neptune was also discovered in the mid-1800s when the use and understanding of radiation was a big discovery at the time. Madame Curie literally died of radiation poisoning. Can't smell it, can't taste it, can't hear it, can't feel it, but radiation is there. Neptune's also the god of the oceans. Yeah, Sheila, the surface of the ocean looks so plastic, but there's all kinds of creatures on down below you can't see. So it's what can't really be seen. What's unseen or covered is Neptunian. When Neptune's not in a good configuration in a chart, it talks about what's not seen or covered, whether it's intentional or not. It's obscured or covered. I'm sorry, listen, Astrology 101, Neptune describes what's covered and covert, let's say by intention. It's the mark of a liar. Neptune is square Mercury. Mercury is mental verbal, mental cognitive verbal. Mercury in Donald Trump's chart is square, internal tension, like a ceiling to wall, internal tension between Donald's ego and his mercurial nature, what he thinks and what he says, is square to Neptune, what's really going on. And then Neptune's square to his moon, what he's really feeling, what's really happening with his personal world. They are at odds. Let's go back to something important. The United States chart is a Cancerian chart. It's about family. So the theme of our president and how the president handles family themes is really key. Joe Biden, he's all about a traditional family where he's very aware, a moon building a light, a moon awareness of the moon, awareness of women and women's feelings, awareness of mom's feelings. He identifies with his father, who identifies with him, Joe Biden does. Joe Biden is solar, he's Venus, he identifies with affection, he identifies with Mercury, mental, he identifies with Mars here, effective mental action, all in a traditional family identity. Donald Trump, born during a lunar eclipse, where the emotions and feelings and what's happening emotionally, happening internally, happening for mom, happening for the family, are completely overrun by what's happening for dad. Donald Trump's chart shows this huge pileup of planets starting at that Mars-Pluto rising. Uranus, revolution on the one hand, Mars, war on the other. Revolutionary war, that is Donald Trump's ego nature. And it's totally opposite any emotion or feeling. This is a really key theme because Donald Trump has a Sagittarius moon. And when we lay Donald Trump's chart over the U.S. chart, we see Sag rising for the U.S. chart. Donald Trump's eclipsed moon is conjunct our ascendant, the U.S. chart's ascendant. The ascendant, Sag, is about the self. So if Donald Trump does not have a good relationship with his family, with his mother, if there's a wound, emotional wound, as a lunar eclipse would say, then his emotional psychic wounds are brought to bear on the identity of the U.S. Donald Trump's chart further has his sun, his ego, exactly conjunct the Mars of the U.S. chart. His ego is joined with the martial action of the U.S. This is a war hawk. This is a guy who starts or creates wars. In fact, don't forget, Donald Trump has Uranus, revolution, conjunct his sun on the Mars of the U.S. This is a person who creates explosive, sudden situations. That's concerning, very seriously concerning.
I'd
When we
say
take Joe
so.
Biden's, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'd say so. That's
Yeah,
doesn't
when we
look so
take Joe
great.
Biden's chart and wrap it around the U.S. chart,
Mm-hmm.
we have Joe Biden having a Sagittarius rising in his birth chart. Joe's a Sag rising. The U.S. has a Sag rising. So Joe's Sun and Venus conjunction that was rising when he was born, Joe's identity is wrapped up with the identity of the United States. The identity the U.S. has at its founding, well, by its founding fathers, is what Joe Biden himself identifies with. Joe identifies with the founding fathers' ideals for our nation. Ideals are Sagittarian. So Joe has his conscious ego and his Venus Sun conjunction, this idea, this idealism about the country, whereas Donald Trump has his Sun and Uranus explosiveness on the U.S. Mars. I think that says it all. There's more in this chart that we'll look at in other, well, there's one last thing I'll say to our viewers.
And I have one question to clarify.
Let me say one last thing.
Okay.
Take Donald Trump's chart and compare it to the U.S. chart. Donald Trump has his Mars almost to the degree exactly opposite the U.S. moon. Donald Trump's Mars, god of war, that Mars energy that's rising for Donald Trump, the monarchy,
opposing the women.
opposing the women. That's right. The U.S. chart has a moon in Aquarius, freedom of women. And Donald Trump's Mars, his willpower, is dead opposite women. Donald Trump's birth chart has the United States moon at 27 Aquarius right on his marriage angle. That normally would say that women and love and relationships and marriage and unity are something that this person would really care about. The United States moon is right on Donald Trump's marriage angle. That's a problem, folks, because Donald Trump has Pluto Mars killing, opposing the marriage angle. Donald Trump has Mars, Pluto, monarchy, powerful leadership and dominance opposing the U.S. moon. Let's not forget, Donald Trump's chart shows there's a very, very offbeat, upended, badly balanced relationship with Donald's ego, Donald's father, daddy experience, the sun opposite the moon in Trump's chart, an eclipsed moon, no light of the moon. The light of women and his mother cannot be seen. So is it good to have the U.S. moon on Donald Trump's marriage angle? Not a good thing. Very explosive. The Mars of Donald Trump opposes the U.S. moon. That's a very key thing to look at. Donald Trump's Mars opposite U.S. moon.
I just wanted to, if you could clarify with the U.S. birth chart being Sagittarius tendencies, can you explain what that means?
So the U.S. chart, July 4th, 1776, is a Cancerian nation. The sun's moving in front of the stars of Cancer. It says our nature is summertime. Our nature is, hot dogs and apple pie and summertime and birthing and family unity.
Yes.
So family unity is a center point of the U.S. chart. It's all about family connectedness, that we're all one big family together. When we were born, and many authorities say historically that was 5:10 p.m. on July 4th, 1776. The moment of our birth, the sign of Sagittarius was rising. And Sagittarius is the sign of social freedom. Sagittarius, in fact, Joe Biden's chart is Sagittarius. Joe Biden is a Scorpio Sag. He's born just 3 days before being a Sagittarian. Joe Biden's a Scorpio at 27 degrees. 27 and a half degrees. So 2.5 days, Joe Biden's born, 2.5 days before the month of Sag. You could sort of say Halloween into Thanksgiving, or November 20th. Joe Biden is a product of Thanksgiving consciousness. Thanksgiving, our nation giving thanks for its birth and the connection that we have to each other. That's the typical Thanksgiving baby's nature. So Joe Biden has Sag rising. The U.S. chart itself has Sag rising. So Sag rising says our rising, our intention to rise to meet the outer world is about giving thanks and spiritual celebration, spiritual ideal celebration is how we rise to meet the outer world.
Wonderful.
A person's rising sign describes how we rise. The sign that was rising when you're born describes how you rise to meet the outer world, what style you use. Our style, freedom. Key word for Sag is freedom.
Freedom. Let freedom ring. That's one of our mottos.
Well, Joe Biden has his sun conjunct our Sag ascendant. Joe Biden has Sag ascendant himself with his sun Venus there, love of freedom, loving kind about freedom.
Yes.
By the way, Donald Trump has his sun opposite Sag. His sun in Gemini opposite Sag. His sun in Gemini on the U.S. chart falls on the U.S. chart on the axis of the other or the open enemy or the balance point. It's not about our sense of ourselves as a nation, but the opposite, them out there. That can go very well if it's a well-aligned chart. But as I said earlier, concern here is that Donald Trump has his sun and Uranus, revolutionary sun. He's a revolutionary on the Mars of the United States and on the Venus too. What does it mean to be on the Mars? Uranus, revolutionary war. What does it mean to be on the Venus? Charm. Donald Trump certainly has charmed a lot of people and money. When I see Mars, Venus together, when I see Mars, Venus together, it reminds me of the chart of Bill Clinton, Mars, Venus conjunction. There's the Venus charming quality and the Mars sexual quality. Like Bill Clinton not only charmed people, but sort of seductively charmed them. This says this president will try to seductively charm people, which I think is very true of what
Yeah.
we've seen already with Donald Trump,
Mm-hmm.
and that his ego is opposite the rising sign of the United States, that Trump's ego is opposite the U.S. rising sign.
Yeah.
So his ego is opposite
Freedom.
the essential issue of freedom.
Mm-hmm. Well, wonderful, Alexander. I learned a lot with this lesson or with this exercise.
So the bottom line, when we can sort of recap here, is to look at our birth chart in terms of that sun-moon relationship. Discover in your own personal birth chart not only what your season sign, sun sign is about, winter, spring, summer, fall, and the phases in between those sort of those monthly energetic changes of the season, but to find out what your moon sign is. Was sun, daddy, and moon well aligned in your chart, or were they at odds in some way? And what was happening for mom and dad at that age, when mom and dad were 25 or 35 years of age and having a baby enter their marital dynamic? What was happening for them? Your birth chart describes what was happening for them, and your birth chart describes what they were going through in their marital journey when you came in.
Well, wonderful. So if you want to know what was happening at your birth and how to navigate this family affair, Alexander is a great consultant to work with. So
Thank you.
remember,
And thank you. So your birth chart, folks, it's a mirror of your journey. It's your personal roadmap of your soul journey, and how to be objectively mindful of what's happening, and how you can kind of direct your own life affairs, and where to go and how to best achieve your goals. Thank you, everybody, for listening.